In 1989, the world watched as the people threw off the bonds of communist control in Poland, Hungary, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. In Bulgaria, the fall of communism was not as quick or dramatic as its northern neighbors. Its political and economic struggle would last for years. But in 1989, Bulgarians were determined to see the country through its transformation. This was the season that changed everything. This was the autumn of change.
I'm Ralica Vasileva from the Bulgarian TV, reporting specially for the CNN World Report.
I was born in Bulgaria, and I lived most of my youth under communism. The communist system was sold to the people as a society in which everybody would be equal. There was free education, free medical care, a guaranteed job. No matter whether you worked hard or not, you were paid the same, your job was secure. So it was a system that basically granted some kind of mediocre life stability to everybody. Bulgaria was led since the 1960s by T.Zhivkov. He was one of the closest allies of the Soviet Union. He got a lot of perks, a lot of help from the Soviet Union. The country was being ruled by fear and by repression. And it was in this atmosphere that Bulgarian philosopher Желю Желев wrote a book about the communist regime. But he didn't write about it directly. He had to tell the truth without saying the truth.
I was just doing, in good faith, a comparative analysis, and this is where things got interesting. So, besides the Nazi regime, I started making a structural analysis of the other two fascist regimes, Franco's regime in Spain and Mussolini's in Italy. And I came out with a very well-cited work about the construction of these regimes. It turns out that they're like mirror images with communist states in everything, with the only difference that the communist regime is a more superior, more complete dictatorship.
And one of that copies ended up in Emil Koslukov's hands, a young Emil Koslukov who was in high school, and he used to listen to the BBC, the Voice of America, all these Western TV stations, and he also read Желю Желев's book and talked about it as a book that actually described communism with his friends. And partly, that was the reason, partly why he ended up in jail at the age of 19. We decided to go with Emil Koslukov back to the Stara Zagora prison where he spent almost 4 years of his life.
I was sentenced for anti-communist, anti-socialist propaganda, as they called it at that time. It was scary, knowing that you're going to spend the next 6 years here. And the moment this door closes behind you, never going to see the outside world anymore. It was scary. I got frightened. But then again, I was 19, so when you're young, maybe you don't think that much about those things. In a funny way, in a funny sense, we get much more freedom here than outside. We could easily talk about the Soviet Union and criticize it because we were sentenced. What else could they do to us? Shoot us?
So what is this now? Where are you taking us?
To the wing. I stayed here for 4 years. And this was my cell. It was a different number at that time, as far as I remember.
Yeah.
But this was the cell. It's fun. Of course, it's much better looking now. We were not allowed to have radios. This is activist. This is absurd. We were not allowed to have these things. And electrical appliances, it was totally banned. They could put you in a punishment cell, in a solitary cell for that.
In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in the Soviet Union. He had decided that he was going to save communism by reforming it. So he announced reforms, which he called perestroika and glasnost. Perestroika was economic reform, and glasnost or openness was freedom of the press. Before Gorbachev, we were able to get Soviet TV, Soviet books and magazines, but they didn't speak the truth. After Gorbachev came to power, all of a sudden, Soviet TV was the most interesting, most fascinating channel that we all watched. We learned things we'd never known before, the abuses of the past. There was no censorship.
My biggest recollection is there was a formal radio that's controlled by the prison authority, and they would let you listen only to the official news, whatever. And it was 1985, 1986, maybe my second year in prison, then I heard Reagan speaking on radio with Gorbachev. When we're discussing with Gorbachev, you know, the opening up of the Soviet Empire. And I heard Reagan speaking on the speaker in prison, guys, here we go, this is the end of it, and it happened. When I got out of prison, I was a good student. I went to the Soup University, enrolled there as a student, linguistics. It was only natural to start organizing the students, being a student myself, in a kind of informal dissident movement. So we started joining the other dissident groups and movements in the country. And they elected me as a chairman, as a leader of the movement, which seems only natural after being 4 years here. I was the only experienced guy within the movement.
There was a reformist wing in the Communist Party, and some of them were like the closest confidants of T.Zhivkov, who saw the writing on the wall. The economy was in dire straits. The Soviet Union wasn't willing to prop up T.Zhivkov's regime. They had no way out. They saw the people becoming excited about change. They saw dissident movements springing up, one after the other. People were losing their fear. I'm in the former Communist Party headquarters building. This is the office of T.Zhivkov. This is where his desk used to be. Today, Parliament meets here to discuss policy. It's a conference room. But this is where T.Zhivkov spent his final days in office, where he sensed that some of his closest confidants were secretly meeting behind his back in this building, plotting to push him out of power. And he also sensed he was out of favor with Moscow. Before November 10th, a very small group of Communist Party members got together and very secretly started plotting the overthrow of T.Zhivkov. General At.Semerdjiев was head of the Bulgarian armed forces, and he was there on the day when T.Zhivkov was resigning.
Members of the Politburo, amongst the closest allies of T.Zhivkov, who were with him in the war years and the anti-fascist struggle, raised the issue of his resignation, and he had agreed.
So they said, this is very wise of you, you're not standing in the way of reforms, and so thank you very much. Tomorrow we have this plenum, and we will discuss this with the rest of the party.
On the morning of November the 10th, like other members of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, I went in T.Zhivkov's residence, and that's when I heard that there was an intention for him to withdraw or be replaced by the leadership of the party.
But he wasn't resigning his state power as president, as chairman of the State Council. At that meeting, T.Zhivkov made a long speech.
After he ended his speech, which was probably 50 to 60 minutes long, we got a break. And during that break, it became clear that he had withdrawn from the post of General Secretary of the Communist Party, and Petr Mladenov was nominated to lead the party. I have to say, for most of the members of Central Committee, this act was a surprise.
And after the break, the elite of the party announced to all the members that T.Zhivkov had resigned from both posts, both as party leader and as president, that he had resigned his state power as well.
I know that the decision to release him also as chairman of his state council was a surprise. Zhivkov did not stand in the way. There was an army 10 kilometers away, a tank brigade, but he didn't mobilize them because he understood that if he did that, his situation would become even more grave.
Cecka Cacheva is the chairman of the Bulgarian parliament for the center-right GER party right now. But at the time when T.Zhivkov resigned, she was a member of the Communist Party. And she told me what she remembered of that day.
Bulgarian TV showed a report on the plenum of the Bulgarian Communist, where we learned that T.Zhivkov had been removed as General Secretary of the Bulgarian Communist Party. It was very strange because the news story was expressing gratitude to his achievements as party and state leader, which didn't quite match his expression that we were seeing on TV.
I didn't expect to see that as long as I'm alive. He's been there for so long. And when he was removed, it was like for a couple of days we actually thought it was kind of a joke. It was a trick the system was playing on us.
Bulgaria had this array of inexperienced dissident groups which were finding their voice and becoming an opposition. And this is where Желю Желев comes in.
We started negotiating before November the 10th, 1989. I personally started negotiating with the leaders of all these organizations under the club to create a unified opposition. We had agreed each and every party needed to put aside their own party platforms and march together until we've toppled the communist regime. Otherwise, we have no chance, and everybody understood that, even the ordinary people who came to our rallies and shouted the two slogans, democracy and unity.
So one of the most important first steps that the Communist Party promised its people is that it would draft a law in which it gets rid of Article 1 of the Constitution, which guarantees the Communist Party a monopoly on power. So that draft law was introduced on December the 14th. However, the people didn't know the procedure in Parliament. They didn't know that this draft law would be voted on a month later. So they expected a vote immediately.
I was at that time the leader of the students, and we started actually we called it the life chain, circling around the parliament, and a lot of other people joined us. It became a huge rally.
Tens of thousands of people joined in. The situation got really tense. The opposition leaders tried to calm up the people. Finally, Peter Moldenov, who took over after Zhivkov, came out. He was faced with this angry crowd, which was basically telling him to go away. He fails to calm down the crowds. He gives up. He starts walking back into Parliament. And just as he's walking back into Parliament, he looks at his defense minister and says, it's best for the tanks to come in. Well, that statement is captured by chance, by accident, by a cameraman who's standing nearby and filming this whole episode.
I have to say that nobody gave an order for the tanks to start moving towards the center of the city. I was in the general headquarters at that time. Defense Minister Dobry issued an order to put the tank brigade on high alert, not to issue an order for it to go to Sofia. But I refused to do that. I refused to issue such an order.
Nobody knew about this statement, bring in the tanks, until 6 months later. So people just kept demonstrating, they kept rallying, they kept pushing for reform. This is a historic area which will be forever tied to the end of communism. Sometimes the square would be packed with hundreds of thousands of people protesting and demanding change in front of this building, Bulgarian Parliament. And just down the street is the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, where they gathered to hear different visions of their future. Expectations for a better life were huge, but they would soon be tempered by the reality that this would be a long, hard struggle. After the huge tensions in front of Parliament, where the tanks were summoned but never came in, the opposition in the Communist Party decided that they were going to sit together around a table and negotiate Bulgaria's transition to democracy. The opposition was led by Желю Желев.
The round table has two sides. On one side, the rulers, on the other, the opposition. And there was no general small talk about democracy, but political negotiations. And there were no general negotiations, but in concrete terms, how do we dismantle the system of communism?
Emil Koшлukov was also a key member of that negotiating team. He was representing the student movement.
We negotiated the basic points of opening up the country and, building democracy. And the best thing is it happened peacefully.
This is a very special place for me. It brings back memories of the winter of 1990 when I was covering the first huge anti-government protests. And just like the hundreds of thousands of people who were standing here, I was letting go of my fear and also being proud to be part of history in the making. The motto of the Bulgarian parliament, unity makes strength. Young people like myself had very little experience, and we were given an extraordinary opportunity. And for me personally, I just used my gut feeling, this gut feeling of general fairness and objectivity as much as humanly possible. This is Bulgarian National Television. This is where I used to work. Under communism, this was the only television station in the entire country, and it was under the tight control of the Bulgarian Communist Party. When communism fell, every day when I would go to work, I would have to pass through a crowd of protesters standing here shouting at us. Some were upset that we were too critical of the old communist system. Others were upset that we weren't critical enough. Neri Terzieva was the #1 rated news anchor in Bulgaria, and she became my mentor.
This studio, Studio 6 of Bulgarian National Television, is an absolute symbol of the transition in Bulgaria. This is where I can say the reform started in Bulgarian journalism.
Neri almost started crying when we walked in there because it was really a very hard fight, especially for her, because she was an ethnic minority. In the end of 1984, beginning of 1985, Bulgaria's dictator, T.Zhivkov, decided that he was going to forcibly assimilate the ethnic Turks, make them Bulgarians. He told them, you will take on Bulgarian names, you will start speaking only Bulgarian, you will not be Muslims.
My name is Neriman, which means tenderness. It's of Persian origin. My new name was Nelly.
Eventually, T.Zhivkov opened the borders for those ethnic Turks who didn't want to assimilate, didn't want to change their names, and he let them leave the country. 300,000 ethnic Turks who had never been to Turkey ended up crossing the border only to live in tent cities. One of the first things after the fall of communism was to take care of the ethnic Turks, to restore their rights, to invite those who were living in tent cities across the border to come back home to their old homes. And they did. It turned out that the political reforms, in a way, were much easier to implement. But the market reforms took much longer because Bulgaria was built on a system which basically could not function in a free world. Under communism, Bulgaria had the Soviet Union to prop up its economy. It would buy most of the products Bulgaria produced and provide it with cheap oil. But in the late 1980s, and especially after communism collapsed, that support went away. Bulgaria was left without any trade partners, and the economy collapsed. It was very hard for everybody, but particularly for the older people who could not find a job, who were being paid a meager pension, which was not enough for them to cover their basic costs. So Bulgarians saw for the first time soup kitchens springing up and feeding the people.
We had high expectations. We thought the moment we start doing as the Americans do, we're going to get the same results in terms of standard of living and salaries. It turns out it doesn't work this way. But we're still trying. We've got to keep on going. This is the only way for Bulgaria.
It would take a long time to get rid of all those Communist Party symbols. There was just so much because the Communist Party infiltrated every single level of society. Where the Bulgarian flag flies right now is where the Red Star, the symbol of the Communist Party, used to be. When that Red Star came down, it marked the end of the absolute monopoly and power of the Bulgarian Communist Party. The first free and fair parliamentary elections were won by the Communist Party, which presented itself to the people as the party which was leading reforms. 6 months after President Mladenov uttered the words, "It's best to bring in the tanks," finally, that cameraman's video came out, and Mladenov was forced to resign. And that's when Parliament elected Желю Желев as president. A year later, he would win free and fair elections and become the first democratically elected president of post-communist Bulgaria.
We had to transform ourselves into Westerners. That required a lot of efforts, a lot of leadership.
Solomon Pasi was not part of the government at that time, but he just decided that he would make it his mission to form an Atlantic club and lobby for Bulgaria's membership into NATO.
When I made the speech at the Parliament in 1990 for dissolution of the Warsaw Pact and enlargement of NATO eastwards, everybody thought I was crazy.
It took 14 years, but in the year 2004, we saw him fighting tears as Bulgaria was admitted to NATO.
Since then, I cannot stay cool when listening to the Bulgarian national anthem.
20 years later, there are problems with the economy, with crime, with corruption that still persist in Bulgaria, and that has led to a certain degree of nostalgia for the good things of the past. Free education, free health care, secure jobs, who wouldn't want that? But there is no nostalgia for the repressive regime of the past. And that is what the biggest legacy, I think, of that autumn of change in Bulgaria is. That people have the freedom, and they cherish the freedom to decide their future and their lives.